Welcome to Fielding the 68. I'm your host, Chancellor Johnson, joined by DJ Bauer and Brad Wachtel. Guys, thanks for joining me. Once again, excited for another show. We'll get right into it, starting with the biggest winners from the weekend. DJ, I'll start with you. Who do you got?
Yeah, obviously a jam-packed weekend of hoops that we just had. I think one of the biggest winners clearly is Michigan State, a team that has been in the hunt for moving up in the bracket, trying to get up to a two seed for a while now. Kind of the big hang up for them has been how well they've done, against other top tier competition. Now they got a couple quad one A wins to go on their resume. They're up to the top 10 in resume numbers, fifth in wins above bubble. So they're doing pretty well for themselves. They're a team that is certainly in the conversation for a two seed now. St. Mary's, obviously, another one. They have been kind of hanging around Bubbleville just based on the fact that they hadn't had a quad one win, or at least one that was going to stay put in quad one. Now they do with finishing out the season by beating Gonzaga. And just having that is just kind of a game changer for where they might be seated. Obviously, you still don't love the fact that their best, road win is against like Pacific or something. But I mean, still, if you're able to beat the WCC's top team in Gonzaga, that's a pretty good indication that you're, for real, in the selection committee's eyes. Missouri is another team that has kind of steadily risen in the ranks for me. They were hanging around for the bubble for a while, and I still think it's a little weird that their net is 53rd whenever all of the other metrics agree that they should be in the 30s or 40s, but they're now 10-9 in the top two quadrants. Obviously, they started off conference play by beating Florida and Kentucky. And as of late, now they have wins over Tennessee, Vanderbilt, and they just won at Mississippi State this weekend. So now they're looking a lot more comfortable in terms of where they're going to be placed in the bracket. And of course, you got to shout out Miami, Ohio. Basically everything that could have gone wrong for them did in that game against Western Michigan. Skaljack was ruled out with an injury at the 11th hour before the game. Peter Suter fouled out with 7 minutes left in the game. They were down. I don't know if they were down double digits, but I know they were down close to it. Found a way to come back and win. The Red Hawks are 29-0, and while other bubble teams continue to lose, they just keep on winning. So they keep it up. That's going to bode well for their aspirations at getting into the tournaments if they're not able to win the MAC automatic bid.
Brad, I'll come to you now. If you could just pick one team, one winner, the biggest one of all, of them all, excuse me, who would it be in your eyes?
Yeah, one winner I would say is Ohio State, without question. Beating Purdue yesterday was so big. They're a team that's kind of been hanging around the bubble for a number of weeks, and you take a look at what they've done. Heading into the game, they only had one quadrant one win. This is their second, and they're just 2-10 against quadrant one opponents. The average casual fan might say, okay, well that team's not getting in. Well, that's not the case. As we saw last year with North Carolina finished 1-12 against quadrant one opponents and still managed to receive an at-large bid. Reason being is because of their quality metrics. Ohio State's metrics, their wins above bubble right now is 37. Their strength of record is 39. They're in a really good place right now with that win. They also have other wins against at-large teams in Wisconsin and UCLA. So look, they don't have a ton, but they are 8-11 against quadrant 1 and 2 opponents, which is another number the committee pays attention to, which is, look, it's under 500, but it's actually not as bad as some of these other bubble teams. And that's what we're always doing. We're trying to compare each team to every other team that's on the bubble. And ultimately, Ohio State is actually in a pretty good shape, even if they do get into the tournament, based on their predictive metrics, all being in the top 35, 37 right now, which will improve their overall seed. So Ohio State, definitely a big winner from this weekend.
I'll let you add to it. Who else caught your eye over the weekend with some big wins?
Yeah, so definitely, if we move away from the bubble a little bit, I'm going to say Alabama. Alabama winning at Tennessee. If you remember, about 9 days ago when the selection committee gave us their top 16 teams, Alabama was not there. They were mentioned as one of the teams that just missed out, so they were a 5 seed at the moment. But winning at Tennessee and going 3-0 the past week, they've really helped themselves out a lot. And they've jumped up to that 3 or 4 seed range. When you take a look at what Alabama has, they have top 10 resume metrics. which is very, very impressive. They're 15-7 against quadrant 1 and 2 opponents, and they have some really good wins at St. John's. They beat Illinois on a neutral court, obviously winning at Tennessee. Some excellent wins on their resume, and I think their seed ceiling is a little bit higher than some of these other teams based on what they've done so far. And then also in terms of other big wins, Texas winning at Texas A&M. I thought that was a big win for the Longhorns, who were sliding towards the bubble over the course of the last week or two, to go on the road and beat a team who was in their seed vicinity in Texas A&M is definitely a statement for them. And they've already proved that they could win games away from home. They also won at Missouri. They won at Alabama, who I just mentioned, and they beat NC State on a neutral court. So I think Texas now really put themselves in excellent shape, especially since they're 6-8 against quadrant 1 opponents. That 6 wins is a strong number. They're in very good shape to receive an at-large bid now.
Yeah, DJ, I'll come to you with that now. How confident should Longhorns fans be after a really big weekend for Texas?
Yeah, I would certainly say very. As Brad just touched on, obviously the quad 1 wins are big for them. They've got 6 of them. That was a reason that they got into the field last year, despite the fact that they had resume metrics in the 50s, is they won 7 quad 1 games. Well, now they got 6 quad 1 wins, and they have resume metrics in the 40s. So obviously a much better situation for them. And of course, as Brad alluded to, the fact that they've been able to win away from home is big. Winning at Texas A&M, winning at Missouri, winning at Alabama, of course, the biggest of all those. They've proven that they can do it not just in their own gym, but on the road as well. If I'm a Longhorns fan, I'm feeling pretty confident about my bid here. So long as I'm kind of just able to steer the course here. Last 2 games at Arkansas, home Oklahoma, you split those games. I think you can pretty much pack your bags for the tournament at that point.
Well, DJ, from our biggest winners to our biggest losers, who would you say took the biggest L of the weekend, hurting their chances for an NCAA tournament berth?
Well, in terms of the bubble teams, the one that I think that is really starting to slide here is SMU. They are a team that has been pretty comfortably in the field for the duration of the season. Obviously they were off to a better start. They started the season 8-0, 12-2 after beating North Carolina just after New Year's Day. Have kind of been a pretty steady team in ACC play since then. But now they've got 4 very tough games to finish the regular season, and they're 0-2 so far, losing both legs of that road trip out west to Cal and Stanford. Again, losses like those aren't bad in isolation, but whenever you're comparing the whole bubble against each other, you can't be stacking those kinds of losses whenever you're fighting for your tournament bid here. And they finish up against a Miami team at home that has played very well. And then they go to a Florida State team to finish out the regular season, who has been a huge challenge for many teams in this conference. So I'm really starting to worry about whether or not SMU is actually going to close this thing out. A little less worried, but still slightly concerned for Texas A&M. Obviously, whenever they started 7-1 in conference play, got those wins against Auburn and Texas, I kind of thought that they were going to coast themselves to a pretty cozy bid here. Not so these past couple weeks. Obviously, losing at Arkansas and losing at home against Texas this weekend, their resume metrics are getting close to the 50s. And again, that's kind of the danger zone. They're a team that I have just above Dayton right now, but I certainly could see them sliding down into Dayton if they were to, finish off the wrong foot for regular season play here. As for teams that I think are more securely in the bracket, Tennessee is a team that I thought had a chance to get up to a 4 seed if they had finished off the season sweep against Alabama. Obviously, they won in Tuscaloosa earlier this year. You stack up a sweep with that alongside a neutral court win over Houston in non-conference play, and you've got a pretty compelling case. Well, not only do they blow that game and kind of lose their chance at a protected seed, but obviously also Nate Ament gets shaken up. We'll see what that situation looks like for the Vols going down the line. Louisville, another team that I'm a little concerned about what their final seed is going to be. They are now a ungodly 0-8 in Quad 1A games. That was the big reason that they got such a bad seed last year. Most bracketologists had them as a 6 seed. They had the resume metrics that were in that range, and they ended up getting an 8 seed from the committee because they were 1-4 in Quad 1A games. Well, what are you going to do with them when they're 0-8 now? Every time they take the floor against an elite opponent, especially on the road, of those 8 Quad 1A games, 6 of them have come on the road. They just haven't been able to win consistently. So even though I still have them hanging around as a 7 seed for a while, I would not be surprised if they got a worse seed than that. Iowa, another team that was pushing for maybe a 7 seed for a moment there. They go on the road and lose at Penn State. somehow that's only a quad 2 win. Penn State, my Nittany Lions are not a very good team. Still only a quad 2 loss for them, but enough for them to kind of push them out of a 7-seed conversation and more comfortably down to an 8 or a 9 seed. And then one more team that I want to shout out here that doesn't have any implications on the at-large field, but certainly kind of got the short end of the stick is Arkansas State. Of course, we know that the Sun Belt finished in a crazy 6-way tie for second place, and Arkansas State ended up being the sixth team out of those 6 based on the seeding. Normally, that wouldn't be too bad for a conference postseason, but that with the Sun Belt's crazy setup, that means that they need to win 5 games to get to the NCAA tournament for the first time since 1999. Whereas Marshall, who finished tied with them in the Sun Belt standings, only needs to win 3 games. So I would not be too happy if I were a Red Wolves fan with how that Sun Belt bracket turned out to be.
I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about UT. Imagine being a Longhorns fan listening to this stream right now. This is a perfect podcast for you. The Longhorns are trending towards safe, and the Aggies, their spot might be in limbo here. But Brad, I'll come to you now. Which team for you concerns you just with some of the losses they had over the weekend?
Yeah, I'll start off with Cal. I thought Cal had before they lost to Pittsburgh this weekend, they've been playing some really good basketball. They had won 3 in a row, and they had just picked up a win over SMU a few days prior to that, which got them into my field and a lot of our other fields as a result. But clearly they thought that win clinched an NCAA tournament bid for them with the way they played against Pittsburgh at home. Just an awful loss. There's really no other way to put it. Could be the loss that costs the Golden Bears a bid when it's all said and done. Now, look, the season's not over yet. They still play at Georgia Tech and at Wake Forest. Now, you got to go on the road to win both those games. I mean, there's no room for error anymore with this team. That's such a bad loss to lose at home. It's one thing if you're losing on the road, but to lose at home, it's a killer. So that's one. I'm going to go next with Auburn. Auburn lost at home to Ole Miss. Another team. Auburn has just been playing awful basketball of late. They've lost 7 of their last 8 games, and they're now 14-13 overall in the season. So right now, there's only been 2 teams ever that have received an at-large bid that were 2 games over 500. So Auburn is not even 2 games over. They finish up against LSU and at Alabama. Are they going to? They're probably going to have to win both of those games. At least beat LSU and then win multiple games in the SEC tournament to have a shot. Because their resume metrics are still in okay shape, so they're an interesting case, but way too close to that 500 mark to get a bid right now. And then I'll also mention Indiana. Indiana losing to Michigan State, another opportunity for Indiana to really get one of those needle-moving wins. Did not happen. They've lost 4 games in a row now, including a loss at home to Northwestern. Similar to Cal, that's just a killer of a loss. Can't happen down the stretch. It just cannot happen when you're trying to get in that large bid and you're trying to prove to the committee that we're worthy. And the issue with that is, look, Northwestern, had they beat them at home, maybe it only would have been a quadrant 2 win. But quadrant 2 wins help. All you have to do is look at Indiana's resume and Ohio State's resume. The one clear difference between the two, Ohio State has more quadrant 2 victories. So every little win helps. And when you look at Indiana's schedule down the stretch, they finish with Minnesota at home, then they go to Ohio State, fellow bubble team. They're going to need to win both of those games. I don't think that's even a question. And that'll put them back in play. But they really put themselves in a tough bind the way that they've played basketball over the last 2 weeks.
Absolutely, they have. Now, time to get to the number 1 seeds. We'll get to the consensus. Right now, you'll see it up on your screen. We have Duke, of course, your number 1 overall seed, Michigan, Arizona, and UConn. DJ, I'll come to you. Anything notable about these teams from the weekend or just where they currently stand in their resume?
No, I think this is pretty solid. I would imagine that most bracketologists have these exact same 4 teams on the one line in that exact order. I think maybe the only question mark is Michigan able to build a good enough resume to pass Duke for number 1 overall, despite the fact that they lost the head-to-head? Because they still lead Duke in 4 of the 6 metrics, all 3 of the resume metrics. And, obviously picking up a win like they did on Friday at Illinois shows that they're clearly capable of playing like the number one team in the country. It's just going to be so hard for them to surpass a Duke team that, outside of a neutral court loss to Texas Tech and a rivalry game loss to UNC, they've been flawless, throughout the entire season. So I'm not ruling out the possibility for the Wolverines to move up to number one overall. But based on that head-to-head result, probably going to need some help here from NC State and North Carolina to finish out Duke's regular season.
Well, Brad, looking at some of the other teams, Florida continues to ride this hot streak that they're on. They've won 9 straight games. How much of a case do they have to potentially sneak in as maybe the fourth and last number one seed?
Well, they definitely still have a case. I mean, anyone that's watched Florida play basketball over the last 2 months, I mean, they are clearly one of the favorites to win it all once again. So they are certainly still in play. They finish off the season against Mississippi State and at Kentucky. Going to need to win both of those games. I think the problem with Florida is the fact, it's pretty simple. They lost to UConn earlier in the season. They lost on a neutral court to UConn. And as the selection committee, as the chair told us last week, head-to-head is factored in, especially when teams are close, when you're really trying to figure out who's ahead of who and you're trying to figure out a tiebreaker. They're going to use that head-to-head. So I think UConn controls its own destiny in terms of becoming that final number one seed. But one loss by UConn, and if Florida continues the way they're playing, absolutely, I think they can pass them. And I don't think it would surprise anybody.
DJ, what about you? Your thoughts on Florida and where they stand as far as potentially getting to number one seed?
I 100% agree with Brad. Florida has arguably played better than any team in the country over the past couple of months. Problem is, what they did in the non-conference also matters just as much as what they've done in SEC play. Committee's going to look at their team sheet and see that their 3 toughest losses in the non-con were to Duke, were to Arizona, and were to UConn, aka 3 of the 4 1 seeds. So, it's going to be hard for Florida to pass any of those 3 teams. Obviously, UConn is the most obvious pick, given that the Huskies kind of have the worst quality metrics out of the bunch. They're the ones that are most prone to falling off that one line. But, if they pass UConn, they're going to have to continue to do some serious winning here down the line and hope that UConn does some serious losing, because that head-to-head result between those two many months ago is going to play a huge factor here. Florida needs to do enough to show the committee that it's a better team than UConn is, in spite of that result. Would require passing them in the resume metrics, which they haven't done yet. Would require passing them in the number of quad 1 and 2 wins, which they haven't done yet. Would require passing them in the number of quad 1A wins, which they haven't done yet. So the door's still open for Florida, but they still need to do some serious work to get to the one line.
Yeah, it sounds like they have to check off a lot of boxes in order to be able to jump UConn. Is there any other team that could be in the mix for number one seed?
I mean, maybe Houston. My only issue with them, they're top 10 in metrics across the board, which, none of the other teams that are vying for potentially jumping onto that one line are. Issue with them is that they've kind of floundered in their toughest games. They had that 3-game losing streak where they lost at Iowa State, they lost at Kansas, they lost at home to Arizona. If they had won just one of those games, I would buy their case a lot more. But, I mean, their last 2 games are against Baylor and Oklahoma State. Neither of those are going to move the needle enough. So unless the selection committee, has a change of heart and really cares about what they do in the conference tournament late in the discussion hours just before Selection Sunday, seems pretty unlikely to me that Houston will be able to do enough to get onto the one line.
Absolutely. Now, we will be right back after the break to chat some bubble teams. Who's in, who's out? Find out after the break.
As you know by now, we have teamed up with BetMGM again this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we will have special offers for Field of 68 fans, including same-game parlays, best-in-class live betting, and daily odds boost. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code FIELD to get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. You download the BetMGM app. You sign up using bonus code FIELD. You deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. Make this college basketball season one for the history books. Make it legendary. And don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code FIELD and get your $1,500 first bet offer today. If you're not a member of the Field of 68's On3 community, make sure to go check us out. Get access to all of Jeff Goodman and Rob Dauster's written content, including coaching carousel breakdowns, info on who is and isn't entering the transfer portal, insider recruiting information from none other than Joe Tipton, X's and O's analysis of all the teams in college basketball, and access to our message board community. A 7-day trial costs you $1. The Field of 68 on 3. Get the scoop.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68. I am your host, Chancellor Johnson, joined by DJ Bauer and Brad Wachtel. Time to talk bubble teams. Who's in and who's out? DJ, let's start with you. Give me your last 4 teams into NCAA tournament.
Sure. And I debated this a lot last night as I was putting my teams together for my bracket. I ended up settling on my last 4 in as Santa Clara, Ohio State, Virginia Tech, and New Mexico. Santa Clara is a team that they've missed on their biggest opportunities. Obviously they would have really liked to beat Gonzaga in one of the 2 games that they played against them. Had a chance to win at St. Mary's and kind of got blown off the floor in that game. But otherwise, they've played pretty clean. All of their metrics support a bid. They're 41st in WAB, which is, a huge number in the eyes of the committee. Every team that was top 41 last year got into the NCAA tournament. And, even though they're only 1-5 in quad 1, they are at least 7-1 in quad 2. So they've got an 8-6 quad 1 and 2 record. If there's a reason to leave them out, it would be that awful loss that they took in the non-conference to Loyola Chicago. But I think just based on the clean state of their metrics, the fact that they do indeed have a win against the field in St. Mary's, I would have Santa Clara in right now. And then Ohio State, obviously a game changer for them being able to beat Purdue. Prior to that, they were 1-10 in quad 1 games. Better than them being 0-10 with Northwestern finally moving into quad 1. But still, that's not a win that really sticks out for me if I'm the eyes of the committee, beating the net number 73 or 74 or 75 team away. Show me something that proves that you belong. Beat a team that's in the field. Even better yet, beat a protected seed. Ohio State has struggled against that all year. Now they finally do it. And so now they finally have a win on their ledger that proves that the metrics that say they belong can be supported with some evidence that would put the Buckeyes in. So they move into the field for the first time, I think, all year for me. Virginia Tech, a team that I have held on to into my field. I'm not confident that the Hokies are in, but they are top 50 in WAB. 50 was kind of the cutoff last year for all the teams that got into the tournament. They were all 49th or better. So they just sneak into that. Again, I'm looking at some of the individual results that prove that you've beaten tournament level competition and prove that you belong. 2-9 is not a pretty mark in quad 1, but at least it's backed up with a 6-1 mark in quad 2. And they have 2 wins that they can point to that show that they can sometimes gear up for a big game when they need to. They beat Virginia in that crazy triple overtime thriller around New Year's. And then, of course, a win that has proved to be pretty massive for them is that they've beaten Clemson. And a lot of the shine has come off that with how the Tigers have slid lately, but still they're firmly in the field. Just going on the road and beating another team that is clearly a tournament team is massive for them whenever you're trying to split hairs among these bubble teams and figure out who's in and who's out. So that puts Virginia Tech in the field for me. And then the last one in that I have is New Mexico. Kind of the reason that I have them a hair below Virginia Tech, Santa Clara, these teams, they really haven't proven that they've been able to beat tournament competition consistently. They've got a home win over Santa Clara. That is it for teams that are in my field. There are some ones that are borderline, that are close. They beat San Diego State at home over the weekend. They're just on the outside for me. They won at VCU. They're just on the outside for me. They've got a 45 average across the resume metrics. I think if you turn your head the right way, it's just enough for the Lobos to get in based on some of the competition that they're dealing with for some of these last couple teams in the field. So feel pretty good about those 4. There's maybe 1 or 2 teams on the outside that I could maybe see taking their spots, but it's ugly down on the bubble right now. So you got to kind of make some tough decisions on figuring out who makes up the field of 68 right now.
Well, Brad, to that point, clean it up for us. I know the bubble is ugly, as DJ just mentioned, but who do you have on your last four teams in?
Yeah, so we have a similar grouping of last four teams in. Two of them are the same. So in terms of Ohio State, I have them in, but I have them a notch above that last four in. In that last four, and I do have TCU. TCU, who, they've been playing some really good basketball of late. They're 4-6 against quadrant one opponents, 9-8 against quadrant one and two, 42 WOB, 41 strength of record. They're still hanging in there. They have some big wins. They beat Iowa State. They beat Florida way back when earlier in the season, beat Wisconsin. The only thing dragging them down for me is the fact that they still have that quadrant four loss from the first game of the season against New Orleans, which is obviously an issue. And then their predictive metrics. Their T rank is 56. Their KenPom is 49. BPI 49. Not particularly great. A team like that, I think, kind of settles in the last four in right now, unless, of course, TCU is able to win at Texas Tech, which is who they play next. And that's a win that could get them put them in excellent position to receive an at-large bid. So huge game coming up for TCU. The rest of my last four in, Santa Clara and New Mexico, that DJ touched on already. Both teams being over 500 against quadrant one and two opponents is a big factor. They're both 8-6, and they both have top 45 wins above bubble on their resume, which is important. Santa Clara is slightly better than New Mexico is, but New Mexico getting that win over San Diego State, coupled with the way the rest of the bubble teams played, is the reason why New Mexico is now in the field. And then my last team in the field was a surprise to me because I did not expect this to happen, and that's VCU. VCU is my last team in the field. I did not think that this was going to happen based on the fact that they didn't win at St. Louis the other week. And, but you know what? When all these other bubble teams lose, somebody's gotta be in. One benefit to VCU, they picked up their first quadrant one win today, as South Florida, who they beat on a neutral court, is now number 48 in the net. So they picked up their first quadrant one win. And the thing that I do like, there's two things that stand out on the resume. And as bracketologists, we always try to pretend that we are the selection committee. What is the selection committee going to look at? Well, first of all, their result-based metrics, which we know play a large role in determining who is in the field. KPI 37, strength of record 46, wins above bubble 46. You take the average of all three of those, there's no bubble team that I left out that's better than what VCU is. So that's one thing. The other thing is taking a look at who VCU has beaten this season so far, but more importantly, who they've lost to. And VCU only has one loss all season to a team that is not currently an at-large bid, in the at-large field. And that was to George Mason. And George Mason got off to a great start this season. They've kind of sputtered over the last few weeks, but that's their only non-loss over a good team. So I think that matters as well. With all that being said, I think when it's all said and done, that last spot that VCU is in right now is probably not going to exist on Selection Sunday, whether it be by bid stealer or whatever the reason. It's probably not going to be there. So VCU still needs to keep winning. Going to need to keep winning, get to the win out regular season, get to the A10 championship, and we'll see how the pieces fall from there. But if the season ended today, yeah, they are my last team in.
VCU is also the last team in our consensus bracket. You'll see VCU, New Mexico, TCU, and Santa Clara. I read it backwards there, but those are the four teams that are the consensus last four in. DJ, you didn't have VCU in on yours. What are your thoughts on their resume and chances?
Yeah, the Rams are close for me. I had them as my second team out today. Obviously you can turn your head and say and make the argument for them. The resume metrics support it. They're 5-7 in quad 1 and 2 now, which isn't great. But again, I mean, we're dealing with teams like Indiana on the bubble, who is 4-12, so that looks downright pretty compared to something like that. And they do at least now have a quad 1 win with South Florida moving up into the net top 50. My big issue for them is that they don't really have a lot of successful results against teams, that are in the field. 1-5 in quad one. South Florida is a good team. They're in the field as an automatic bid. They would not be in the field as an at-large. They lost at home to New Mexico, who is another team vying with them for a tournament spot. So that's a knock against the Rams. Really the only one result that you can point to that maybe would justify it would be the fact that they beat Virginia Tech on a neutral court, a team that they're competing with for an at-large berth. So if those two teams end up being right next to each other on the seed list, that might be reason to pick VCU over Virginia Tech. But I would still side with the Hokies team that, in addition to having 3 more quad 1 and 2 wins, beat Virginia, a protected seed, and won on the road at Clemson. Those are 2 results that are just completely absent from VCU's profile. So it's close between the two. But if I were picking a team to put in the field between the two, I would take Virginia Tech with their win quality being a little bit stronger.
Well, let's just stick with that for a moment now, because since you had them as one of your first 4 teams out, who are the other 3 that are on your first 4 teams out?
Yeah, so teams that I've got just outside of the field alongside VCU, they're my second team out. I've also got Cal, Auburn, and Indiana making up my first 4 teams. Cal, obviously a back-breaking loss that they took at home against Pitt. They were clean in quad 3 and 4 up to that point. That is now a quad 3 loss that's going to stay there. It moved their resume metrics down below 50. They're 51st in WAB, 50th in KPI and strength of record. And obviously the quality metrics have never been really fond of the Golden Bears. They rank in the 70s there among BPI, KenPom, and T-Rank. The thing that still has them close is that they do have 4 quad 1 wins. They beat UCLA on a neutral courts. They won at Miami. They beat North Carolina at home. So they have wins against teams that are in the field. And if they can just win these last 2 games against Wake Forest and Georgia Tech, easier said than done for sure, but that probably moves their resume metrics back above the 50 threshold, gives a little bit more girth to those 4 quad 1 wins. I think there's still a chance that the Golden Bears can move back into the field, but that, they need to avoid disaster like losing to Pitt again. That was the last time that they can have something like that happen to them this season. VCU I already touched on. Auburn, meanwhile, they still have some of the numbers that would support them being in the field. 45 resume average, obviously do well in the quality metrics. They're 28th in BPI, and they've won some huge games. They're the only team in the country that won at Florida, who is arguably the best team in the country right now. Not to mention some of the other wins that they were able to collect. The problem is just the overall record. They're 15 and 14. We cannot be putting a team in the field that has lost half of its games. And I think that they're going to get a long leash based on the fact that they played such a difficult schedule, both overall and non-conference. But it gets to a point where, we're just saying, why are we putting a team in that has won just as many games as it has lost? I think the magic number for Auburn is probably 2 games above 500 because of the shape of the bubble. There have only been, as Brad touched on, 2 teams that have ever gotten an at-large being 2 games above 500. I don't think they're going to make that accommodation for Auburn if they're 1. So they need to beat LSU. That's no question about that. I would say that they probably need to go to Tuscaloosa and beat Alabama. If they can do that, then they will be 16 and 14 heading to the SEC tournament. Now we're talking about maybe them possibly getting in as a last 4 team in kind of thing, but they have not played good basketball lately, so I'm not even confident that they can do those things. And then my 4th team out right now, Indiana. It was kind of a telling sign of affairs what happened between the 2 Big Ten bubble teams on Sunday. Both had huge opportunities at home. Ohio State had Purdue and Indiana had Michigan State. Ohio State went out and won that game for their first big win, that proved they belong in the field, and Indiana lost that game. And as a result, they fell to 4 and 12 in quad 1 and 2. Their resume metrics are now at 55. It frankly doesn't matter that the quality metrics still think that the Hoosiers are a top 40 team whenever you have had so many opportunities against quad 1 and 2, opposition, and you have lost 75% of them. So Indiana's going to have a real uphill battle for them to get back into the field at this point because of that mark. Last 2 are home against Minnesota. That doesn't do anything for you. And then at Ohio State, if they lose that game, I would feel pretty good that they can start packing their bags for the crown. Indiana's not going to make the NCAA tournament if they don't go to Columbus and win.
Brad, I know your first 4 out teams look a little bit different, but for the most part the same. Let me see yours, and which teams do you have on that one?
Yeah, so I have one team that's actually different, and that's USC, who, that may have changed after the news that we got today. The fact that Chad Baker-Mazara has been kicked off the team. So that doesn't help their case. With that being said, USC has been playing awful of late, but they still have top 50 wins above bubble, top 50 strength of record. They do have wins. They have a win at Wisconsin. They beat Indiana. Seton Hall neutral court, which is not particularly great right now. Their final two games are against, they're at Washington, and they get UCLA at home. Those are technically two quadrant one. I'm sorry, one of them is a quadrant one opportunity. The other one is quadrant two. If they happen to win both of those games, which they're going to have to, that'll put them over 500 against quadrant 1 and 2 teams. That would put them at 11 and 10, which makes their case a little bit stronger than it is now. But with the way they've been playing and the results that have been happening, and the news of their leading scorer getting kicked off the team, doesn't seem like that's going to happen. But for right now, they're still hanging on by a thread, and it's a shame because they were in the field for quite some time over the last number of weeks. But the bottom has finally dropped out for them. And then, DJ touched on the other teams. Auburn is going to be very interesting if they continue to remain over 500. Obviously, if they finish at 500 or under and the committee decides to put them in, then they'll just have egg on their face because that would just be ludicrous. And I get it. They won at Florida, which is amazing. Great win. One of the best wins of any team in the country. But at some point, you got to draw a line. And then my other teams, like DJ said, Cal. If Cal can finish out with 2 road wins, that's going to help their overall metrics. Indiana's going to need to finish out with 2 wins. So all these teams, they need to win games now. This is it. We're in the last week of the regular season, right before conference tournaments begin. It's now or never. You got to go and you got to win, because any more losses for any of these teams probably is going to spell the end of their season.
Let's take a look now at the consensus first 4 out. It includes a lot of the teams we already talked about here: Virginia Tech, California, Indiana, and Auburn. Now, Brad, former head coach Bruce Pearl, he was talking about Miami of Ohio, comparing them to, well, he didn't necessarily compare them to Auburn, but we were kind of talking about just how Auburn is on the bubble here. I don't know if Bruce Pearl necessarily wants to hear that. For you, what did you kind of make of Bruce Pearl's comments? Obviously, he didn't directly talk about Auburn, but his thoughts on maybe just Miami of Ohio there.
First of all, in terms of Bruce Pearl, we know who his son is. His son is the head coach at Auburn, so he was obviously referring to his son's team, which, you know what, any father should do. You're always looking out for your son. So I don't have an issue with him saying that part, but I do have an issue with him talking about Miami of Ohio. Look, if a team is going undefeated, if they lose one game, if they happen to lose in their conference championship, they are an at-large bid. You can't tell me you're going to keep a team out of the field in favor of a team that is hovering around the 500 mark. Come on. First of all, nobody wants to see that. Let's be real. And I get it. They're the SEC. The SEC last year, they got a bunch of, so many teams in the field. It was ridiculous. But in this case, it's a little bit different. Like I said before, you got to draw a line somewhere. And when you're comparing teams at the mid-major level to teams that are in a power conferences, it's very difficult to do, especially when they don't play a similar schedule. But what you have to look at, metrics. And metrics, we know they play a significant role. You take a look at Miami of Ohio's result-based metrics. Their strength of record is 21 in the country. They're 32 in the wins above bubble. So in terms of that, that's much better than what Auburn is right now. Now, if you want to play the role of what's going to happen in the future, a lot of times people say, oh, we're selecting the 68 best teams. No, we're not selecting the 68 best teams. We're selecting the most deserving teams based on their resume. We don't select teams based on their recruiting class or based on, they have 2 top 5 NBA lottery picks. That's not how this works. It's your total resume. It's what you've done throughout the course of the season. I have a hard time when people say the best teams, and they say it in college football too, the best teams. No, it's not the best teams. It's the teams that went to work in the regular season, did what they had to do, and proved that they're capable of doing it already. And I think it's such a misconception that people always say that we're just trying to find the best teams, because that is not the case. Sorry for going a little bit off topic.
No, I love that because if you look at your face right now, you're red. So that's how I know you actually mean everything you're saying right now. DJ, what about you? Do you share the same sentiment that he does?
I'm glad that Brad mentioned the whole best versus deserving argument, because I would have said the exact same thing word for word. People are too hung up on the facts. People are saying, oh, Miami of Ohio hasn't beaten anybody. Actually, if you look at their schedule, they've beaten everybody. We're too hung up on the 350th ranked 350th ranked conference schedule, 364th ranked non-conference. We have numbers that provide more context to that than just looking at those numbers for what they are. They're called strength of record. They're called wins against bubble, and they're on the team sheet. And they show that, yes, even against an easy schedule like that, going 29-0 is still extraordinarily impressive. So, I know Bruce Pearl is just going out there and looking out for Auburn and trying to do what's best for his team and his son, a school that he had spent so many years at. But you don't need to do it at the expense of disparaging another deserving team who has played their butt off this entire season. We cannot kind of undercredit a team that has gone 29-0 when no other team in the country has done that. I don't care how easy the schedule is, because we have the numbers that show that it's impressive. So, what Bruce is doing is really bad for the sport, saying things like that. We don't need to be doing that. We need to be heralding the successes, especially of mid-major stories like this. And thankfully, the selection committee, I believe, is going to see it the same way. They are a lot more level-headed. They are more analytical than some hot takes that we have floating out in the media. So, I'm hopeful that even harmful words like those that he said are not going to play a factor in how selection and seeding goes down the line.
I'll make this really quick. Miami of Ohio's athletic director, David Saylor, had the same thought. He tweeted at him saying, "You were flat out wrong when you say we would finish last in the Big East. The disrespect is awful, and you should not be near a TV studio covering the sport when you show your true colors." He let him have it. I love the beef around this time of the year. It's fun. Now, really quickly, we'll go to the consensus. First four out. It is, because this is next four out. It is USC, San Diego State, Seton Hall, and West Virginia. That is your next four out. We'll see if those teams are able to get into the actual field. Now, we'll be right back after the break with more on Fielding the 68.
As you know by now, we have teamed up with BetMGM again this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we will have special offers for Field of 68 fans, including same-game parlays, best-in-class live betting, and daily odds boost. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code FIELD to get up to a $1,500 first bet offer on your first wager with BetMGM. Here's how it works. You download the BetMGM app. You sign up using bonus code FIELD. You deposit at least $10 and place your first wager on any game, and you receive up to $1,500 in bonus bets if your bet loses. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD when you sign up. Make this college basketball season one for the history books. Make it legendary. And don't forget, if you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, use bonus code FIELD and get your $1,500 first bet offer today.
Are you trying to follow everything happening in college basketball? It can be overwhelming. That's where the Field of 68 Daily comes into play. The Daily is your go-to source for recruiting news, game analysis, portal updates, and much, much more. For just $50 a year, you get access to the same information that your favorite coaching staff is subscribed to. Quality content can be hard to find in the college basketball space. The Daily is here to help. Make sure you subscribe today.
Welcome back to Fielding the 68. I'm Chancellor Johnson, joined by DJ Bauer and Brad. Fired up Walktail after the last segment there. Time to talk about some Big Ten hoops. We'll go with Michigan State. Brad, we'll come back to you on this. How do you see their resume, and how likely are they to potentially get a 2 seed now after their hot streak?
We have them as a 2 seed right now. Part of that is, the way they've been playing and picking up a big win over the weekend on the road at Indiana. The other part is that is because of how these other teams have played. that are on that 2 and 3 seed line. Michigan State's won 4 games in a row. They won at Purdue as well. Beat UCLA, beat Ohio State, 2 teams that are floating around the bubble right now. They also beat Illinois earlier in the month. So they've been playing really well of late. And I do think a number 2 seed is realistic. And I actually think they're going to need some help. But I think they're a dark horse for that final number 1 seed. I think they're a dark horse. And I'll say that only because of who they get to play. And they still get to play at Michigan. So they play Rutgers next on Thursday. If they beat Rutgers and win at Michigan, they're going to need some help as well. They're going to need UConn to probably lose a game, and Florida as well. But if that happens, I'd be hard-pressed not to include Michigan State in that conversation. When you take a look at their metrics right now, they are top 10 across the board in their result-based metrics. Number 5 wins above bubble. Number 7 strength of record. So they may not have, that top tier quality win, but if they win at Michigan, well, now you've won at Michigan, you've won at Purdue, you beat Illinois, you beat North Carolina neutral court, won in Indiana. You have some really good wins that has the chance to get them at least very close to that number 1 seed line. So to answer your question, yes, a number 2 seed is in play. Still could go back and forth. They could still fall to a 3 depending on other results. But they've really helped themselves out more than almost any other team in that top 16 seed line, top 16 teams over the course of the last 10 days.
DJ, is a 1 seed on the table for the Spartans?
It could be. As Brad says, it would certainly be a long shot. They would need a lot of help just because of how much the 1 seeds plus Florida have separated themselves from the rest of the pack right now. But if they were to finish off the regular season by winning at Michigan, the door would be open for them. The resume metrics support that they should be on the 2 line. I put them on the 2 line today. They're 5th in wins above bubble. Strength of record 7th, KPI 9th. The quality metrics are closing in as well. They average 10.7 across those. My big hesitation on them previously, and why I had them as a 4 seed for a while, and why the selection committee had them as a 4 seed for a while, was that they just did not win enough against top tier competition. Well, now they've beaten Illinois. Now they've won at Purdue. Now they add another pretty good win at Indiana. All of a sudden, that issue is amended in short order. And so you're going to see the Spartans fly up the seed list whenever they can do something like that. Again, I think a 1 seed is kind of out of the picture unless they can win at Michigan to finish the regular season. If they can do that, then the door is still open.
Well, one of the reasons why Michigan State has been able to bolster their resume was the big win that they had on the road at Purdue. Brad, what are your thoughts on the Boilermakers after their recent slide? Back-to-back losses now.
Yeah, I mean they're troubling. I feel like we did this like a few weeks ago when they struggled. They had lost 3 in a row when they lost at UCLA. They beat Illinois and Indiana, and then they came back and they won the next 4 games, and they seemed like they had righted the ship. But now, once again, losing at Ohio State and losing to Michigan State as well, they've fallen down for me to a number 3 seed right now. They finish off against Northwestern on the road and Wisconsin at home. Even if they win both of those games, it's not doing a whole lot for them. I think what kind of hurts Purdue is the fact that they lost at home to some of these teams that they're fighting against, including Illinois, including Iowa State, as well as there's one other team, Michigan, and of course Michigan State. So there's a lot of these teams that are in their seed vicinity that they've lost to. Not only did they lose to them, but they lost to them at home, which is a problem. So look, there's still time for them to turn it around. Big Ten tournament. I still believe in this team. I believe in Matt Painter as a head coach. We know he's one of the best to do it. And we'll see if they could get it turned around heading into Big Ten tournament play. But right now they've fallen to that number 3 seed line with the possibility of getting back up to a 2 based on how they end up playing early on in the Big Ten tournament.
Brad, we'll stay with the Big Ten and UCLA now. What are your thoughts on UCLA Bruins after their loss to Minnesota?
Yeah, I think UCLA is still okay. I think they were able to afford that loss based on the fact that they had won their previous 2 games at home, especially beating Illinois. Losing at Minnesota is not the end of the world, even though Minnesota is an under 500 team. It's a quadrant one loss. It would have helped for sure, but I don't think it hurts them as much as you might think. But now, like, their quest for a bid is still up in the air. They're certainly not a lock yet. They got 2 games left. They play Nebraska at home and they go to USC. So neither game is going to be easy, but they need to win. If they could beat Nebraska at home, I'll feel much better about their chances of receiving an at-large bid. When you take a look at UCLA and what their current resume looks like at the moment, so they're 0-7 against Quadrant 1A road neutral teams. And that's, we've heard that the complaints from Mick Cronin about having to travel, cross country so many times. I get that. I do. But they haven't beaten anybody of note away from home. They are 9-10 against Quadrant 1 and 2 opponents, and we've compared that to, we already talked about a plethora of bubble teams that are much worse than that. The fact that they don't have any losses against Quadrant 3 or 4 teams is helpful. And they hold top 40 wins above bubble and strength of record. Now, the one thing that does stand out on this resume is their record away from home, and that's 3-9. That record is worse than any other team that's a current at-large bid, and we've seen it in the past. The committee looks for deficiencies on your resume, and that is a serious flaw that stands out for UCLA. So hopefully they can get a win at USC later on this week. If not, I would like to see them pick up some wins in the Big Ten tournament. A neutral site win will certainly help their case. But they're not out of the woods yet. They're hanging around. They're currently a number 10 seed for me. And, they can also thank the number of bubble teams that lost over the course of the weekend that actually helped their case out a little bit more.
DJ, if you can see into the future, all right, Selection Sunday just happened. What type of speech or soundbite will we get from Mick Cronin after we get the results from Selection Sunday?
Well, of course, he's going to complain about them handing them a 10 seed, and they have to go all the way across the country to play their game in Greenville, North Carolina, or South Carolina, or Buffalo, New York, or something like that. To piggyback on what Brad said, I still feel comfortable that they're in the field. Obviously, they have all the metrics that support it. They have the wins that support it. Beating Illinois is obviously a huge part of that. Beating Purdue. But I'm not going to be too keen on their seed if they can't go out and win some more road games or neutral games, because all of their best wins have come at home. They have one win outside of the Pacific time zone. It was at Penn State. That doesn't move me. And I don't think it's going to move the selection committee either. We know how important it is that they always say, who did you beat and where did you beat them? Well, the who is good, the where not so much. So, even if you can win at USC, that's hardly a road game. You basically just go across town to play that game, but it still helps a little bit. It still goes down on the team sheet as a road game. If you can go into the Big Ten tournament and win some games in a neutral site, they're 0-3 on neutral sites, so that's going to help that out a lot too. Just go and prove that you can beat teams whenever they're not in Pauley Pavilion, and I think UCLA will be fine.
DJ, from the Big Ten to the Big 12, BYU, they've taken a slide. They have now lost 7 out of their last 10 games, but they still are sitting right there on a 6-seed line. How fair is that in your eyes?
Yeah, and the whole thing about BYU is just in comparison to other teams that they're seeded around, because none of those teams have really done anything to stand out. You're looking, who can I move ahead of BYU to move them down to a 7 line? You got a Louisville team that's 0-8 in Quad 1A. You've got a Villanova team that has 1 win against the field in Wisconsin. You've got a St. Mary's team that has 1 Quad 1 win, beating Gonzaga. Your options are slim pickings for who you're going to move against a BYU team that is still 6-7 against Quad 1, that is still 5-2 against Quad 1A, and importantly, even with Richie Saunders' sideline, picked up a Quad 1A win, beating Iowa State whenever they came to Provo. So, obviously, am I concerned about how far this season is going to go for them? Yeah, obviously they've had 3 wins compared to 7 losses in their past 10 games, and they have 2 tough games coming up against a Cincinnati team that's playing well and a Texas Tech team that inevitably has looked pretty unbeatable, even with JT Toppin hurt. So maybe that they lose those games, they're on a 4-game skid, that finally pushes them down to a 7 or 8 seed. but they still have done enough good work from that 16-1 start to the year, as well as being able to prove that they're able to win a game without Saunders beating Iowa State, that they've been able to hang around in the conversation despite some of these unsightly results that they've had as of recent.
Brad, DJ just mentioned Texas Tech, and obviously the big question after JT Toppin got hurt was, how would the committee potentially see them, and just in general, how would they play? Since then, they've responded by going 2-0 since then. What have you been able to make out of what Texas Tech has done so far without JT Toppin?
Well, first of all, we know what the committee's thinking, which is great, because we saw it 9 days ago at the top 16 reveal. The committee actually had Texas Tech as a number 3 seed with JT Toppin when he was healthy, and they only knocked them down 1 seed line to a number 4 after that. So we almost, we got the answers to the test early on, which is nice because now we know exactly what they're thinking. So with Texas Tech being at that 4 seed line and having the stretch that they've had without JT Toppin, I think has been incredible. To go on the road to Iowa State and pick up a win like that just proves that they should be a 3 seed right now. I think that's what the committee was looking for. The fact that they could go on the road and win, and I think especially since it was on the road, because a lot of teams can win games at home. When you do it on the road, especially at Iowa State, one of the toughest places to play in the country, like, are you kidding me? That is a huge win, not just for their resume, but just for how other teams are going to view them, how the committee's going to view them. I think that really said a lot about it, a lot about what the Red Raiders are and what they can potentially do in the NCAA tournament. And if you take a look at what they have the rest of the way, they finish up with TCU at home, and then they go to BYU, a team we were just talking about. So that'll be interesting to see how they could finish up, but there's no reason why, with the way BYU has been playing of late, that they can't go 2-0 in those games and really solidify that 3 seed moving forward for the NCAA tournament.
Absolutely. And pardon me, I said 2-0 since JT Toppin. They are 3-0. Obviously, don't discount the Iowa State win, beating Kansas State, Cincinnati, then going on the road. Graham McCassin has done a fantastic job for the Red Raiders. Now, a team that is set to make the NCAA tournament for the first time since 2019, that would be UCF. They've been floating around anywhere from as high as 7 to as low as 10. DJ, where do you have the Knights right now? As they're destined to go back to the tournament, but the big question is where?
Yeah, well, I had moved them up to a 7 seed after they had gone and won at BYU. That was one of the most impressive wins of the season. The final score was a 13-point margin. That does not tell the whole story. BYU was almost winning by 40 at one point, UCF was almost winning by 40 at one point in Provo. Like, that was an eye-opening win for a team that has been, crushed by the predicted metrics. The fact that they have, lost games in blowout fashion and won a lot of games against bad teams by close margins, they still hang around the 40s and 50s in the like of Ken Pom and BPI and T-Rank. The good thing for them is that the resume metrics matter a bit more for getting into the field. And, they've done very well there. Obviously winning at BYU, beating Texas Tech at home, beating Kansas at home, and winning at Texas A&M. Those are great, great wins that are going to get them to the tournament for the first time since 2019. Of course, then they go and turn around and lose at home to a Baylor team that does not look like they're going to be making the NCAA tournament. And so those question marks that you have about those predictive metrics kind of pop their head up once again. Yes, BYU or UCF is going to make the tournament. They have the wins to do it. Are they going to be seeded well? That remains to be seen. I moved them down to an 8 seed after that home loss to Baylor. I think maybe that's kind of the selection committee's solution for them is, well, you have the results that say you belong. The quality numbers don't necessarily agree. Get out of the first round and have fun with a 1 seed. See if you guys can prove that you belong. So, maybe we're destined for a repeat of 2019 in that crazy game against Duke that they lost at the buzzer. Fingers crossed for the Knights that they have a better fate than that. But I'm not so sure. I think they might be destined for that 8-9 game at this point.
Yeah, I know the Knights fans are just hoping to get into the tournament, or they know they will, but they're excited to get in for the first time in a while. Now, DJ, we'll close with this one. What are you watching for the night as we get ready for only 1 week left of regular season basketball here in college hoops?
Yeah, of course. Well, tons of great games on the docket, but of course we've got postseason play as the big one. Horizon tournament starts tonight. IU Indy at Cleveland State. two sub 300 teams in Ken Palm duking it out to advance to the next round. That will have my attention just because it is so great to have postseason basketball back. Obviously, a couple more impactful games for the bracket. Duke plays at NC State tonight. NC State is a team that they've been like one win away from being locked into the field for like a month now, and they have just fallen on their face every time that they've had the chance. They got blown out against Virginia. They lost at Notre Dame. If they can beat Duke, then there won't be any questions about it anymore. Wolfpack will be going dancing, that's for certain. Alabama, Georgia, a big one tomorrow. Can Alabama continue its ascent and possibly get up to a 3 seed? We've got them as a 4 right now. Resume metrics say that they could possibly continue to climb. And then a very bubbly game on Wednesday, Miami at SMU. That's going to be huge for the Mustangs. They have been slipping out of safety for a while now. Can they right the ship and clear themselves out of the stormy waters before it's too late?
Brad, what you got?
Yeah, for me, so tonight, Iowa State at Arizona. Iowa State trying to get back on that 2 seed line. I think that would obviously do the trick, especially bouncing back after that rough loss at home to Texas Tech. We'll see what they could do. Also, Tuesday night, I'd like to see TCU and Texas Tech. TCU, with a win at Texas Tech, could pretty much shore up their NCAA tournament bid. I think that would help out a great deal. And Texas Tech, can they continue the mojo without JT Toppin in the lineup? And then if we look at Wednesday, a game I'm paying attention to because it's going to have a significant impact on the bubble should they lose. That's New Mexico. New Mexico hosts Colorado State. A loss to Colorado State would be a killer for New Mexico. Now, the one saving grace that they finished the season on the road at Utah State. And that's a game that could get them into the tournament. So I'll be looking at that game, as well as Ohio State, Penn State, just because these are can't lose games, and those are games that are just as important as the games against teams that are at the top half of the bracket.
Excited for a fun week of hoops. We will be back later on in the week for on Fielding the 68. I am Chancellor Johnson. Thank you for joining us on the show. DJ Bauer and Brad Wachtel. We'll see you next time.